Hey friends, welcome back to the Godspeed Garage. Well, here in Central Oregon, it's finally indoor project season. So what better time to get to work on things that I can't do outside than now? Not really this short. This car is just up on blocks. Now I've had this engine block and all the parts and pieces for quite a while. In fact, I started doing these videos a year ago with full intention of actually getting this build done. If you missed the story on how I got all of this, I explained it fully well in that first video. I'll put a link to it up here as well as down in the description, so you can check that out if you'd like. Right now, we're gonna work on actually getting rid of some of these boxes that I had just laying around everywhere. Gotta get these projects done. It's high time, way past time. So the real quick rundown, I got this engine block off a buddy of mine who built it for a truck. They didn't gap the rings right, blew out a piston, tore the engine apart, and it sat in his shop forever. Until he came to me one day and said, hey, do you know anybody who wants a 383 stroker? And I was like, I can probably think of a guy. So he gave me this and all of the parts, and he's since moved, so he's cleaned out his garage and gave me more parts for any small block Chevy kind of stuff. And it's been sitting here forever. I finally got the heads that I ordered at the beginning of the pandemic. It took 2 years to get here. Didn't want to cancel my order because the price jumped like everything else did. So they finally arrived, and then they sat on my bench for a long, long time. Finally decided I was gonna get to work on this engine. I kind of have an idea of what I'm gonna need as far as gaskets and all the other little things. So I ordered all of that. It all came in and sat on my bench for a while. I took the block back to the machine shop just to get a good final inspection after that first video where I did all the honing to get the rusty spots out. And the machine shop said this block is perfectly fine. There's no additional work that needs to be done on it. I mean, it has less than 100 miles for sure on this thing before they blew it up, which I'm intending to not make the same mistake. Stay tuned, subscribe, all that stuff. They did the pistons for me because I had to get a whole new set of pistons because the style of the piston that's the exact same part number has changed, which I found out the hard way. Don't get me started. But they put them on the rods. We got the crank polished out and cleaned up and everything and rebalanced everything. So it should be good to go. Now, because this was already a 383 stroker, and I'm just kind of putting it all back together, there's a lot of stuff that I'm not gonna need to do, but I'll go over with it all as we go along in this video. First things first, you gotta make sure it's clean. Again, I went over this when I built that engine for old Grandpa here, this old LS engine, way back when. You can watch that if you wanna get really into detail on how to clean these engines. But essentially, you just kinda wanna take brushes and go in any orifice you can find. You're also gonna wanna kinda chase some threads. Now, since my engine was recently rebuilt, not recently, but you know what I mean, I probably won't need to do that, but I'm gonna do it just because I don't wanna tear this thing apart and rebuild it again. I wanna do it once and get it done. So just make sure your environment is clean, make sure your tools are all clean, make sure you are clean, wear gloves, just really try to keep any dirt out there. The main rule of thumb is if you think about you going in for heart surgery, they're gonna open you up. You probably don't wanna have problems with stuff that's in there that shouldn't be in there, right? You don't want any infections, you don't want any of that stuff where they'll have to open you back up again. You'll have further issues. Same thing when you build an engine. You want everything to be as sterile as possible. Think operating room, sterile, clean, as much as possible. Here are some of the tools you're gonna need to clean the block well. You're gonna need a handful of brushes. Now again, on that LS build, I didn't buy engine brushes for it. I just went to like your store, or whatever store you have in town, buy all kinds of different size nylon brushes. You wanna use nylon because you don't want any scratching. Brass could also work, but I prefer the nylon ones. You're gonna need a couple buckets. I use mineral spirits because that dissolves the oil really well. It's not water-based, so it's not gonna leave flash rusting. You're gonna need some gloves. You're also gonna need some compressed air with a nozzle that's good to get into some of those passageways that the brush will loosen it up, but the air will actually blow it out. You're gonna need some shop towels and some terry cloths. Why do they call them terry cloths? Is it named after a dude? You will need some engine oil. You're also going to need thread chasers, not taps, because taps will actually make the threads sharp. We don't want to change the threads on any of the holes like the main caps or your rod caps or your head studs or bolts or whatever you're using, because those are very specifically torqued, and if you change the threads on those, it might change your torque setting. It might come loose a little bit easier. This one here from ARP is the one that I've got. This is the correct size for any small block Chevy engine from like 73 to like 90, maybe beyond. Don't quote me on that, but all right, well, now that I got all the oil passages, water passages, bolt holes, everything all cleaned up, wiped down all the surfaces. I cleaned up the crank as well, making sure to rub a brush through all of these little oil holes here. There was a lot of gunk in there, so I'm glad I did that. Wiped it all down again. Compressed air also helps to blow out holes and things like that. So now we can do the next step, which is the mock-up. Making sure that there are no clearance issues, making sure that everything is within tolerance of all the different things and the yada yada yadas. So we're gonna start with the crank. Before we do that, we're gonna install our crank bearings. Now I decided to go with these King bearings, and for the main bearings, here's the part number. I'll also put it down in the description for you. And here's the part number for the rod bearings. Again, down in the description. Each crank bearing has an upper and a lower. You can see on the part number, usually there's a U and a L. The one with the U is the one that goes in your block. And you can't really get these backwards because they have these little teeth on here that go in the tangs. So they kind of only go in one way. And once we got all the bearings in place, now we can install our crank. And before we do that, we're gonna put a little bit of oil on each bearing just so we don't have any metal to metal contact. We'll install these caps, making sure we go in the right direction. Just kind of hand tight. I know I'm using my impact, but it's on the lowest setting. And then as you turn it, you shouldn't see anywhere getting close to any metal surface. Really, for all these clearances, you're looking for 80 to 100 thousandths of clearance. An eighth of an inch is 0.125, so it's 125 thousandths. So less than an eighth of an inch is probably good if you're using the micrometer. So if you look right here, that's about 100 thou. I don't see anywhere else where it's even remotely close. That's the only real close spot right there, but I think we're good. Next thing, we'll attach our pistons one at a time. Again, paying attention to the orientation because they do go a certain way. We will put a little bit of oil on the bearings. I'm also going to put a little bit of oil on the skirts of the piston since those will be riding in the cylinder walls. We're going to be installing these without the rings. And of course you want to protect your crank journals from these bolts. So you want to make sure that you cover them. I'm just using some fuel line, anything that'll stay on there. So those are just snug, they're not torqued down. So now we'll check for anywhere where it may hit against your engine block. This is looking pretty good. We got a lot of space. Your engine, as it heats up, metal does expand. So if it looks like it's close, it's probably too close. See, now these aren't torqued down, but you can see how close that bolt is to that little section there. That looks like it's been clearanced, but yeah. I'm gonna put my feeler gauge down there and see how close that is. That looks too tight to me. So this one is 32 thousandths. Yeah, see, I can't even get that in there, which is not nearly enough. You can see how close that is. It's not hitting, it looks like it's hitting, but it's not. So, looks like I am gonna be doing some clearancing. I'm gonna mark that, and yeah, we'll come back to it. Good thing I checked. Another spot you want to look for to make sure it's not hitting is up here where your camshaft goes. Right up in that wall up there. Sometimes that rod can hit in there as well, but it looks like we're clear. We got plenty of room in there. All right, well, I got this all marked up where I need to get a little bit more clearance on it. So I will just grind that down wherever I have that mark. Cylinder number 2 and 4 were the biggest, and then back here on cylinder number 8 it actually wasn't that bad, so I'm just going to touch that up just a little bit. When you're grinding away at this, you want to watch out that you don't get too far down into the cylinder wall. So I'm actually going to kind of try to stay away from that a little bit because the rod arm comes swinging through this way. So it kind of doesn't really need to go into that cylinder wall at all. Biggest thing is you don't want to burr. So I'm going to make sure that I leave just a little bit of that white line right there. I also taped off some of these oil holes because you don't want metal shavings going down in there. They could get lodged. So here are some of the tools we'll be using. I'm going to use these deburring bits. Now, word of caution, be forewarned, these take off a lot of material. So if you feel more comfortable, you can use the sanding discs, or you can go super slow and just take off a little tiny bit at a time. I'll be using a combination of the straight tool and the angled tool if I need to get it. And then obviously you want protective gear. You want to protect eyes, ears, and nose and mouth and lungs and stuff, as well as an apron and gloves and long sleeves and boots and anything else you need to protect your skin. I'm also going to be using the shop vac to catch any of the metal shavings so that they don't get into the engine. Okay, I got the crank installed back in there. I put the bearings all back in there, a little bit of oil back on there. And now let's check to see where we're at. So this is the #1 piston. It's kind of hard to tell on the camera, but remember, we're just looking for 80 thousandths to 100 thousandths clearance in there. And that looks to be over 80 thousandths, not quite 100 thousandths. So I think we're good. So I'll go through and check all the other ones and we'll see where we're at, if we need to do more grinding or not. All right, well, I think I got it. I ended up clearing a little bit more on this cylinder here, but now that I'm looking at it, we got 80 thousandths to 100 thousandths inch clearance. So I think we're good. So the next step now is to thoroughly clean this. I'm gonna send it off to the machine shop, have them steam clean it, and then we'll come back and we'll clean it again through all the oil passages and everything. And then it's time for pre-assembly. That's gonna have to wait for the next episode though, so make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like this. Make sure you leave a comment down below if I miss anything or you would do anything different. Get yourself a t-shirt over here. Check out the social medias down here, and I'll see you on the next one.